Hello, welcome to Podsongs, where I interview inspiring people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. Today's guest is a former professional poker player. She's a World Series of Poker and European Poker Tour champion, and the only female player in history to win both a WSOP bracelet and an EPT event. Now, I don't know what that means, but it sounds impressive. So she's given all of that up to go back to her first passion, which is science. She's a television presenter and has her own YouTube channel where she makes science simple with these great videos. So let's dive deep into the complex world of Liv Boeree.
Anyway, thank you for having me on here.
No, thanks for taking the time to speak to me. I mean, you're so busy with so many different projects at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's I just really like the format. I get a few podcast requests quite often, but I've never had one before where it ends up having a song written out of it. So it's definitely a unique offering.
Thank you. Well, that's the first thing to talk about is what direction do you think I should write the song about?
Man, one of the videos I'm working on right now is about how when game theory goes bad, and specifically about this character that I'm sort of writing about called Moloch. So basically, Moloch was originally the god of war. I think by the ancient Canaanites or whoever, who sort of like had this, and it was this like awful like deity that people would sacrifice their children to in order to be better at war and to win more things. And I think like the sort of modern version of that is kind of like, it's basically because competition itself is kind of a neutral thing. It can be good, like with like sports and fun stuff where everyone, even though people are competing for a fixed prize, everyone comes out happy. Usually, value is gained. Or it can be just a purely neutral thing. And obviously, in some cases, it can also be a bad thing. Like usually with war, everyone ends up a little bit worse off than if it hadn't happened, and would rather war not happen in the first place. So that's an example of competition going bad. And Moloch is like the god of when competition goes bad. And I'm currently like writing a video about sort of how that applies to the beauty world. And it's just an interesting thing in general because it's like it explains a lot of the problems that we have in the world, where we're sort of in these like undesirable situations where everyone kind of feels trapped in a like the sort of many things in like the political system and so on. They've all come about from basically competition getting a little bit out of control, and even like capitalism and so on. Like I think a lot of people's disdain for capitalism is because they feel like competition is getting a little bit out of hand and it's creating these sort of big disparities and so on. But again, like a good capitalist system it's got a healthy amount of competition because it can drive progress and and get problems fixed faster because there's a bit of competition going on than if there was no competition at all. So it's like about finding this like right amount of balance of how much competition is healthy and isn't. So yeah, if you can find a way to write a song about that would be awesome, because that's actually like my main focus over the next 6 months is like getting these ideas out there. So it could be a very good compliment, but totally understand if you can't.
So is it specifically about the beauty industry then?
This particular video will be, but I think my general projects over the next 6 months are going to be about sort of this wider stuff. I want to like try and tackle this concept of like, because is capitalism bad? Is it evil and so on? Like, I don't think it is. I think it's actually a very good thing. It's created a lot of great stuff, but there are certain aspects where where like unfettered competition needs to be reined in. And sort of trying to like teach people about like game theory and so on, because it just explains so much of like society's problems. And a lot of people like always want to like blame it on this like one specific thing. I'm trying to think of an example. I can't think of an example right now, but it would also be very damaging, I think, if we move to like a purely communistic model or so on. There's a lot of downsides from that too, and I want to push back against this current zeitgeist, which seems to be about hating on capitalism, because actually capitalism, it can be excellent. It's just we need to contain the competition aspect on certain things where so that technology doesn't get too out of hand.
It's funny how I get these synchronicities between my guests sometimes, because my last guest was Russ Roberts, who has the Econ Talk. Mm-hmm. He's an American economist. And so he did some rap videos to try and explain the difference between Keynesianism and monetarism. So the free market versus controls. So
interesting. He did a rap on that?
Well, I think he wrote it. He didn't actually rap, but he wrote.
That's so cool. I have to check that out, because it's I love hearing when people try and sort of, because these are quite dry scientific topics, and when people find a way to try and communicate them through art, is really cool, and that's what I'm trying to do with this video. So someone who's written rap about it would be fascinating.
Yeah. So what is game theory then? In that, is that to do with just the free market?
Well, yeah, I mean, game theory basically is sort of the mathematics of competitive situations. So to an extent, yes, the free market sort of arises or can be explained by game theory. If there's multiple actors, which each individual, let's say, whether it's customers or companies providing a service or whatever, the fact that companies have to sort of compete amongst one another to win customers enables therefore, this allows a marketplace to emerge. And so there's sort of those dynamics between all the different parties is sort of you can mathematically model them via game theory. Basically, that's what game theory is.
Okay.
As a poker player, I was a professional poker player for 10 years.
Right.
Much of, really what poker is it comes down to being a mathematical problem, and you can model it using game theory in order to figure out what are the optimal strategies so that, you make the most profitable decisions in the long run. Most games, whether it's chess or poker or, negotiations for house, if you're buying a house, that's a negotiation, which is kind of a game. These can, the sort of more simple the game, the more easy it is to model mathematically. But in theory, the whole economy is actually just a very complex game, if you sort of get down to its roots.
And so what are you trying to do with your game theory? Say that what is the mission behind it? Is it to say that capitalism's gone too far and it should?
No, I mean, honestly, my mission right now is to actually just try and figure out the answers to this. I don't have a particularly strong opinion, because it's a really complex topic, and I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it. My biggest mission, not to sound too grandiose, is just to make sure that we don't blow ourselves up over the next 50 to 100 years, because we aren't on a great trajectory right now, given all the various sort of, again, it comes down to this idea of Moloch, competitive dynamics going bad. Moloch's just getting a little bit too powerful for my liking, because basically what's happening is we're creating more and more technologies, which can be used for immense good. They can also be used for immense bad. And when you combine those with sort of too strong a competitive situations, then that can end badly. And since the 50s, since the Cold War, we have actually now got the technology to technically end all life on Earth. If full-blown nuclear war broke out, that would be exceedingly bad. It might not wipe out everybody, but it will wipe out the vast majority. So I would like that to not happen. And we're seeing more and more, whether it's biotech, whether it's AI, whatever, more and more technologies which could create absolute utopia, or they could create hell on earth. And so I want to understand better, what are the forces that could either turn these to good or to turn these to bad, and then find a way to communicate them to the right people, whether it's communicating it to the general public, or whether it's just communicating it to key decision makers or tech leaders or whoever. Just trying to figure out the best way of stopping that. You might be familiar with the effective altruism movement.
Oh yes, I was going to ask you about that.
So effective altruism is basically like, okay, there's so many problems in the world. How do we figure out? There's so many problems, but we've only got limited resources with which to try and fix them, whether it's time or money. How do we figure out which ones to prioritize first? So kind of like a nurse or a doctor in the emergency room, their job is to sort of triage patients as they all come in to figure out who's most urgent. Effective altruism is about triaging the world's problems, and it increasingly seems to be the case that when you factor in things like sort of scale, solvability, but also neglectedness, the biggest things we should be working on are these like emerging potential catastrophic risks or even existential risks where like literally all life on Earth could be wiped out over the next 100 years. If you sort of run the mathematical calculation, it seems like that should be the biggest priority.
That's a big one,
of where people should be. Yeah, it's a really big one. Like it would be, it'd be terrible if 99% of the world gets wiped out, but it'd be even if 100% wiped out, because there's actually a surprising amount of evidence that we might be the only intelligent civilization in our local area of the universe. And so it'd be an extra big tragedy if that just like, who knows, even the universe's purpose is wiped out because we couldn't get our act together and cooperate and not build these silly technologies, or at least not find a way to use technology and in a safe way. So so that's kind of like my overarching goal.
That's a big one. No, that's all. I wanted to ask you about also, but I had one of my other guests mentioned keyhole economics and about how you use what's the smallest thing we can do to achieve the maximum results.
Ooh. I'm not familiar with that term. Can you explain it a bit more?
Sure. I'm not really qualified, but you basically have keyhole surgery.
Okay.
So you just make a small.
I see.
You make a small incision, and it's the same sort of thing with. So, for example, if you have global warming and pollution, instead of doing all the regulation, you can just put a tax on the pollution.
Right. So it's about like finding like really efficient and effective methods. I guess efficiency seems very important. Like minimal input to create maximum positive effect. Exactly. That's extremely in line. It's basically the similar principles to effective altruism. I guess the only slight difference is that it's not effective altruism doesn't just focus on efficiency. For example, like if you have the choice between two charities or organizations you could donate to, one might be very, very efficient, where like 90% of the money received goes like directly to the recipients. But it might not actually be what matters more is just how cost effective it is. Like if you, want to donate £1,000 to one, and that ends up saving 10 lives, but is only 20% efficient. Whereas another one you donate £1,000 to and it only saves 2 lives, but is 80% efficient. Ultimately, what you care about is how many lives are saved per unit money. So actually, you would choose the more effective but less efficient one. But that's getting quite into the weeds there. But yeah, generally speaking, efficiency and effectiveness very important.
Because you started a charity for the poker players donate to.
Yeah. It's called Raising for Effective Giving. And it's basically just like an advisory service. Doesn't take any money. We just self-fund it and we draw upon the best research from the various organizations that trying to figure out this the answers to this question of like, where's the best place to donate your money to? It just basically gives a list of the most effective charities to donate to.
So what are they? What would be the most effective?
So there's like 3 or 4 different categories, basically 3 categories if you want to think about it. There's improving the lives of humans alive today. How do you either save the most lives right now or make them, improve the happiness of the most lives alive right now? And then you've got the same question, but for animals, or like sentience in general. And then the third one is like the same question, but factoring in all future lives as well. So if it's a question of just human lives today, then it seems like almost always the at least over the last few years, the best charities to donate to are the Against Malaria Foundation, the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative, which is basically like a deworming program in Africa. And then the third one is Give Directly, which is literally just like money transfer to the most like provably poor families usually again in India or Africa. And these have been like tried and tested and proven through basically the scientific method, like using randomized control trials and so on to see like what are the impacts of doing these interventions as opposed to not doing them. And if people are interested in that, they should just go to givewell.org, who are the ones who they're basically like interestingly, like sort of economists or researchers who just use really rigorous research to figure out what are the best interventions. And it seems like for the last few years, it always seems to be those particular ones because they're just such neglected, such big problems, and yet actually relatively easy to solve. In terms of like your money just directly saves people's lives. And then with animals, it always seems to come down to factory farming reduction because in terms of like numbers of animals per year, it's just not even close, the amount of suffering that's going on through like these just horrific factory farms that with just even some small improvements, like the welfare standards of the animals could be improved, like in terms of slaughter methods, in terms of the way they're kept, and so on. So there's various charities. Off the top of my head, the Humane League is one. If you go to animalcharity.evaluators.org, they are again sort of doing the same job that GiveWell do, but for animals, and they'll give you the best recommendations. And then the third category is for future lives, and so that comes down to sort of like basically doing this research into, well, what are the likely problems facing the future. What are the likely ways that we could go extinct or have some kind of big catastrophe or some terrible thing that creates suffering throughout the universe? And that's when it gets a little bit more sort of speculative. But again, if you sort of run the maths, if you do sort of an expected value calculation, like economists do, like poker players do, then actually it seems to show that that's probably the best place to donate your money to. It's certain foundational research organizations. And if you go to our website, reg-charity.org, it shows you what the best organizations to donate to there are.
Fantastic. Yes, that's wonderful. So does game theory come into that as well? Is there a tie-in? Or?
It's not so explicitly. There's some game theory in terms of like some of the research that's, for example, like the Future of Humanity Institute does, and those kind of organizations that are looking into these like catastrophic risks. They will have to do some game theory in terms of like trying to evaluate the likelihood of nuclear war, because that's really that's a game theory problem. Like, how would the US react to Russia doing this certain action, or doing this kind of proliferation of nuclear weapons in a certain way, and so on. So like anything where there's like sort of strategic things happening between world powers or companies building some scary new technology or something like that requires some game theory.
Are you also worried about the global warming effect, or are you more about the flash?
No, I mean, global warming is definitely a big problem. The reason why I don't mention it quite so much is that compared to many of the other global catastrophic risks, of which global warming certainly is one, it gets comparatively more attention. So again, like neglectedness comes into this. It comes into play a lot. Like if there weren't these other ones, then global warming would have all of my attention. It's just that compared to some of these other things, it's getting comparatively, like the other problems are getting comparatively little funding compared to the focus on global warming. So I'm still definitely worried about it, but I would rather move the needle on some of the other ones because I think I can have more impact there.
So you're like campaigning for nuclear disarmament? Is that what a top priority, or?
I wouldn't say it's my top priority. I mean, again, it's a tricky one because you can't just say, oh, everyone, it's a coordination problem. Like you could just say, oh, Russia, get rid of your nuclear weapons. But that might, if you somehow like try to force them to do that, that could actually create more harm than good, because right now we're in a sort of semi-stable situation. It's very, you need like everyone in the world to somehow like get rid of their nuclear weapons at the same time, and then like have some way of preventing anyone from building new ones. But that's like kind of I don't want to say impossible, but a near impossible thing to do, because you've got, because of this bad game theoretic situation, it's like this kind of trap that everyone's in. I actually made a video about this on my YouTube where I used an analogy. Yeah, it's called like the Doomsday Clock and nuclear war, and I make an analogy between sort of, basically it's like people playing at a poker table where the table's really weak and it's got a thin table leg that might snap, and everyone keeps buying more and more chips, and each chip is a nuclear weapon, and so the table's getting more and more like precariously balanced. And if anyone makes even one bet, if China or US or whoever makes one bet, the stakes are now so high that the whole table will fall over, because then like everything, all the bombs go off. So yeah, it's
you can tie everything back to poker now if you were.
Funnily enough, yeah. I mean, that's why poker's such an interesting game, because it's such a cool analog for so many life situations. I mean, I don't like to overuse it, but it's surprisingly handy as an analogy. But it's nuclear disarmament. I mean, basically making sure that the world stays, the major powers understand the position that we're in. If like whoever the world leaders are understands how volatile and precarious the situation is, and like why having more treaties and sort of good relations is better than having fewer treaties and bad relations. That reduces the risk that any nuclear weapons get fired.
What was the name of that film with Stanley Kubrick with Peter Sellers way back in the 60s?
I don't know.
Was it How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, I think.
Oh, interesting. I haven't seen that.
That's fantastic. Peter Sellers plays, I don't know how many, 5 different parts in it. And then they launched the weapons, but then Russia had a doomsday machine, which they forgot to tell them about. So if you launch any weapons, then they will, they'll launch the doomsday machine. It was basically an AI would pull the trigger on all their weapons.
It doesn't sound that dissimilar to what we have today, to be honest. Yeah.
Because
I don't think AI is in charge of any nuclear weapons. I hope it's not. But I mean, at the same time, humans aren't the best things to be in charge of nuclear weapons. In theory, if we had a super intelligent AI, that would be better than humans being in charge of it. But it's ensuring that it is actually super intelligent is the tricky thing.
So are you worried about like Google and all these big technology companies rushing to develop these AIs? The new arms race, basically.
Yes, that's the idea. Like if there was just one of them working on it, I wouldn't be too worried, because then they're not in a rush, and then it would be done well. And I mean, to be fair, like I'm a big fan of Google's DeepMind. They I know a few folks who work there, and like they're just really sensible, smart people who definitely have like the best interests of humanity in mind. But the tricky thing is of course, like the more people who start getting involved in the AI game, the more of a sort of race it becomes, and when it becomes a race, then shortcuts are taken and so on. So it's definitely a concern overall.
Aren't they at the stage now? Aren't they at the stage now that the AIs make the AIs, though, or is that?
No, not as far as I'm aware of.
Okay.
No. I think that's, that would definitely be an interesting inflection point were we to get there. But as far as I know, that's not the case yet.
All right. Okay. So that's sort of what you're going to be doing these videos around for the next 6 months, this game theory.
Yeah, that's my main focus. Sort of just trying to find ways to explain these kind of concepts and making sort of, I don't want to say art, but a form of making these things digestible for as many people as possible.
They're very good videos. I mean, you make quite a few now.
Thank you.
Are you with a production company or are you?
No, it's just me.
Ah,
I mean, I would like to partner with a production company in the long run because I'm just way too slow at doing it myself. And plus, it's good to have other like creative input. I did just get a video editor. I've had a video editor help me on a number of them. But yeah, no, I'm looking for a way to like ramp up the speed so I can just focus more on the like research and writing, and then less on the actual like. I know it's just tricky because I'm like trying to do. It's a new area. It's been very fun to learn about it all, like how to do it well. But I want to find a way to do it faster.
wow, I can't believe you made them all yourselves. I mean, that's
I mean, some of the editing and graphics, I outsourced. I have a couple of good graphicists and so
Mhm.
on. But yeah, no, the vast majority is being a one girl band. But it's a fun way to learn it.
Because you have why conspiracy theory is so appealing. That was a good one, and also the 5 meta things that will blow your mind.
Yeah, that the meta one was just like I can't even remember what I was just browsing Reddit or something,
Yeah.
and I just came across fun stuff. I was like, oh, this, and then just came out of there. The meta one, I definitely had a lot of help with the graphics, so I can't take credit for
Oh,
that.
okay. You can't do everything.
No.
So do you read like these nature magazines and then to get inspiration, or how do you come up with these subjects?
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of blogs. I mean, it's the author paused for a while, but Slate Star Codex is just an incredible blog. Um, and that sort of inspires a lot of my stuff.
How do you
Wait,
spell
but
that?
why? Slate Star Codex.
Okay.
Um, it's I think one of the best blogs on the internet. That and Wait, but why? So those inspire me a fair bit. And then yeah, just like if what else? Less Wrong is another great one.
Hmm.
Lesswrong.com. Um, what else? Um, yeah, and then I mean, just if like interesting, like if some like interesting science breakthrough comes out, then I'll try and cover something on that. But the last 3 months, I was in the States, so I just couldn't really. You need to have a studio set up, otherwise I find it really hard to make content actually. So, yeah.
Hmm. And have you written a blog post about this game theory, or summed up your thinking? It's just I don't really
No,
feel
no, not
qualified.
yet. No, that's. I mean, I'm focusing on making this particular video, and then I would
Okay.
like to. I was thinking about like sort of. I think maybe just putting even the scripts of some of my videos up as a blog because some people prefer to just like read as opposed to watch.
Sure.
So like that might be a fairly sort of quick way of doing it, or like writing it up as another thing. But yeah.
Or I'm going to have to study game theory as well, and I'll be quite well behind you. So
You don't need to actually study all the maths of it, to be honest. I think that level isn't that. It's more just about understanding like positive sum, zero sum, and negative sum situations, and then understanding like these things called multipolar traps, or as I'm going to call them Moloch traps. Rebrand them to that, which is basically again these like sort of coordination problems where everyone gets stuck in a situation that's not as fun as that's sort of suboptimal, but it's impossible for any one particular person to like change the course of it.
so no one wins the game. You or someone wins
Well,
to the.
exactly. No one in the end, no one really wins. It's a negative sum situation. So everyone is like slightly worse off for having been involved than had the game not happened in the first place.
And everyone not in the game as well.
Technically, no. It depends. It depends also where you draw like the
Mm.
boundary of the game. But like, obviously, if something like nuclear war happens, that's unequivocally like even if you could say that the like a peasant a peasant in the middle of America, or Africa or wherever, who has absolutely nothing to do with it, they're technically not in the game, but
Mm-hmm.
they would also like, there's definitely like externalities if like Trump and Putin went to war, which would affect them. But I think like for the most part, when you talk about a game, you're sort of drawing a sort of a boundary around everyone who's like kind of involved in it in some way.
But what if there was like an online war and systems got shut down? And I mean, we're all so reliant on the the internet.
Yeah, I mean, so that would be an example again, like between, well, yeah, that's like if there's like some kind of online attack, then yes, that would disrupt. And I mean, that you're seeing that a lot, like these hacks that are happening that seem to be coming from state actors in some cases, that are deliberately trying to disrupt the infrastructure of other countries. Yeah, that's very bad. You know, it's a very bad thing that some people choose to do, and it's a shame that people are doing that.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll get studying on that. One thing I wanted to ask you about, other thing is, because you've written a lot about UFOs and aliens and things like that. What? So, because you were writing about the probability, I heard you talking about astrobate and the possibility of the different life forms on other planets being quite low. I just wonder what you think about this, because there's been many sightings of UFOs and many reliable testimony from people who've seen it. I think this year the US Navy released video. What do you think about that?
Well, see, I would disagree that there's been many, because an interesting thing that seems to have happened that people aren't paying attention to is that UFO sightings were awfully common in terms of, like, you know, these videos and so on. They were really common back in like the 50s and 60s on these really grainy images, right? And yet nowadays, you would assume that if they were happening as often as they were back then, like even if they decreased a little bit, the number of UFO videos that were being uploaded to social media would like have absolutely exploded, right? Because everyone nowadays has a phone. It's very cheap and easy to record video. People whip out their phones at anything, like, you know, someone yelling at someone else in the street. People are filming everything these days, and anything entertaining or interesting gets uploaded to the internet. So why are we not seeing thousands and thousands of times as many UFO sightings being uploaded in a much better quality as well to the internet, if they were, you know, at the same, like they were back in the 60s whenever something happened, you know? So to me, that's actually very strong evidence that those ones back in the 60s or whatever are actually not that reliable, because otherwise we'd be just seeing them all the time being uploaded, even if we hadn't seen them ourselves with our own eyes, because like someone would have seen it and someone would have filmed it. So I think that is quite a strong data point against the reliability of the things back then. I can't speak for those were pretty interesting, the US Navy things. I don't doubt that the pilots saw something that they couldn't explain. Like, I don't think the pilots are lying. I would I think it would be great if there were aliens and UFOs. I just don't think that, given the lack of reliable evidence, like people forget that the lack of evidence is actually evidence in and of itself. So one or two situations from like the US Navy is still not enough to overcome the otherwise relative silence that people are seeing. And you know, when astronomers look out into the galaxy and so on, we would expect to see, given that, you know, if life was common, and, you know, or at least intelligent life was common to the point that it would be able to like send out spaceships or send out radio signals, you know, or build superstructures or whatever, then, you know, why would it seem so incredibly implausible that like we wouldn't be able to see it? You know, like there's billions and billions. We know there's billions of planets in the galaxy now. So even if a fraction of those produced intelligent life, why, you know, it should be, you know, we've gone so quickly, you know, it's taken us basically 10,000 years to go from building the first little huts to literally being space exploring ourselves. That's like an absolute blink of an eye in terms of the age of the universe and of the galaxy. So, you know, you would expect to have seen at least remnants, if not like current activity from all different kinds of planets, all different ones. Like there should be galactic wars or whatever going on, you know, just like we should be seeing all these, you know, just an incredibly busy galaxy. But again, we're not. So that suggests one of a few things. Either you could say, oh, okay, well, like all aliens know to be quiet. But again, if you're talking about like billions or trillions of possible different civilizations, the chances that like even a few of them are not is very high. A few of them are even just like us. We've been sending radio signals out into space very happily, and like certainly not trying to keep ourselves secret. So then that would suggest that like either there's no life out there except for us, or that there's something stopping life from getting beyond a certain point to where it becomes very noisy and like colonizes the rest of it, the rest of the galaxy. Now I'm hoping that basically there is, and this is called the Great Filter. So the question is, where does the Great Filter lie? It could either be ahead of us, or we could have already passed it. And obviously, we really, really hope that it's a case that we've already passed it, and that actually just like Earth is, for whatever reason, incredibly lucky, or basically just the first, or basically that in order for a life form to become to our stage is just an incredibly hard thing to do, but we're the lucky ones that made it past. And so that's like one of the biggest sort of questions of our time is like, where does the Great Filter lie? But given the sort of the trajectory that we're on and the way things seem to be playing out with like technology and like this nature of competition and war, it could well be that actually it just lies in front of us. And so we're on a really precarious path. So yeah, it's really fascinating. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that, by the way, that aren't like, I have a few friends who've had some like crazy drug experiences where they've like literally felt like they've talked to aliens or some kind of like other form of intelligence. And I'm not like, their stories sound pretty compelling, honestly. So I'm not saying that there aren't something like sort of extra dimensional to us that are able to communicate in some way. And maybe it's like some early civilization that sort of like transcended this particular three-dimensional universe and are able to talk to us in certain states. That could be possible, and that'd be really cool. But in terms of like the conventional little sort of aliens that are sort of confined to what we understand to be the universe, where it like they're like living on their planet and like that type of society, where there seems to be a real absence of evidence, or even ones that would like have to fly over here in UFOs. Like it just doesn't really make any sense. Like because the universe should then be teeming with it all the time, and everyone would have captured it on their iPhone at some point.
Sure. Because I've also been thinking a lot about it, and I'm actually a member of the oldest UFO organization in England. And
really?
Yes, the Aetherius Society. And
have you seen one?
It's in London, yeah.
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen one myself. No, no claim to that. But I was just thinking, it's interesting because what you said about, because the length of the age of the universe, I mean, billions and billions of years, and that life exists on this planet in every, the bottom of the oceans and the top of the mountains and all conditions, it's teeming.
Right.
So then the answer that we haven't seen anything, is that, there's no life on anywhere. So, but the one solution which would answer this is frequency. So if light is the same as sound, because on sound there's life on every different frequency existing together in the gamma rays, the X-rays, sound waves, everything's together in the same space now. And if life existed on different frequencies, then so if one planet in our frequency is gaseous, is gas, but on another frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum it's solid and there is life, and then that would explain why we can look as far as we can and not see anything on our bandwidth. No,
I mean, yeah, I think in terms of the electromagnetic spectrum, that it doesn't quite work in that regard, because the electromagnetic spectrum, is basically a very core fundamental part of the physics of our universe, as far as we can tell. So I think what we're sort of, you're using different language to describe what the same thing as what I was saying in terms of like extra dimensional. So yeah, like there could certainly be like other life forms that exist under very, very different physics, and basically in like under like very different like instantiation of the universe, basically, which we would therefore not be able to see. Maybe they can see us, maybe they can't. Yes, I completely agree. That's certainly possible. But in terms of the like ones that would exist under the same physics as our universe, which, to be fair, like the physics holds pretty well across different portions of our observable universe. What's outside the observable one, the universe, we can't talk about because we can't observe it, so we have no information. But like cosmology is actually surprisingly advanced, and like the predictions we make are like hold true very often when people like do them and sort of test them in terms of like observations we would expect to see. When we get better and better telescopes and we peer further and further, like things tend to hold fairly well from our current understanding of like theories of physics. So it's, like we like sound. First of all, sound and electromagnetic spectrum are very different things. Like sound is the transmission of energy through a like physical medium of some kind, whereas electromagnetism is the transmission of energy literally through it can transmit through a vacuum. So it's actually quite different. But then of course we have gravitational waves, which are the actual like ripples. That's kind of like the sound through the fabric of space-time itself. So that's really cool that we've like proven that those exist recently, because that's another way of like listening to the universe effectively. So yeah, I would be surprised if there's like a life form that like emerges on a planet, it's like some exoplanet in our galaxy that is like definitely like adhering to the same laws of physics as us with like electromagnetism and so on, that of like then like that everyone else is doing that and somehow coming like escaping to a different realm where like the physics they emerge from no longer applies. But it's certainly possible. Again, it would be really cool because it would also imply that therefore we would have the option to do that someday, which would be great. I like the idea of
have you ever seen that in a science fiction or like a Star Trek, or that there are these other realms that people can flick between?
I mean, in terms of like a sci-fi, well, actually, like a really good sci-fi series that I just read is The Three Body Problem. It's very like physics dense. It's like it's hard sci-fi is a technical term, but it talks about like this. I mean, there's aliens in it, and there's like hyperdimensionality as well.
Okay.
In terms of like, so it's such a fun series. The first book, I know each book gets progressively better. There's three books, and it's like the most like out there thing I've read. But also done in like a really reasonable way. Like the guy who wrote it is a physicist, but it like really gets out there and it's so fun. So yeah, I think you'd love it.
I'll have to check that out. The three body.
The three body problem. That's the name of the first book.
Okay.
And then book 2 and book 3 are called something different. But if you just start on that one and then go from there, it's amazing.
Oh, I'll have to check that out. Because also with the Ethereal Society, that explains the reincarnation, that we go to a different realms when between these lives we're reincarnated on another realm. So we reincarnate here, reincarnate there. So it's all about these different realms that are exactly in the same space that we are in now, but they're just at a different frequency.
Really?
Yeah.
How like, is there a way to sort of predict where you would go, or like how does it work?
I think you go to the level that you vibrate at. So the heavier realms, the darker realms are for heavier, the more materialistic people, and then the spiritual realms are lighter. So yeah, that kind of heaven and hell idea. But it's still it's still, you go there to experience what you want to experience. So if you take somebody, if you take someone from the casinos to church or to a museum or a library all afternoon, they wouldn't be very happy. So
right,
that kind of, yeah. And if you
how do you raise your frequency?
Spiritual activities, yeah. Selfless service to others, yeah. altruistic living. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, focusing on like just making the world a better place, and it actually sounds a little bit like a friend of mine has been talking about this, like sort of different levels of consciousness, and how it's kind of fun because it kind of almost like tries to sort of evaluate the different emotions in terms of like how they align with consciousness, and like, you know, if you've got like full enlightenment at the very top, interestingly, that like the opposite end of that is shame. Shame is he considers the most negative emotion, even below like anger and other things. Like shame is like the least, is like the worst. In terms of sort of frequency and consciousness. I don't know if that sort of aligns with what you guys sort of ascribe to.
Well, we received one book that was channeled down through us from one of these masters, and it's called The 9 Freedoms, and it explains. So it goes beyond Buddhism and the other religions. That because when you raise Kundalini and you achieve enlightenment, then cosmic consciousness, and then ascension. That's when you can leave the life cycle of this earth, when you fully raise Kundalini. And the 3 stages before that are bravery, love, and service. So that's what you need. Before you can love, you really need bravery. So you have to. That's the thing you need to do anything. And then service to others. And then the stages after you've ascended, you leave the life cycle of this planet. Then you can go on interplanetary existence. Then you go Saturnian existence. That's the highest planet in this system. And then you can go to solar existence. So then you make sunlight.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sunlight is very important. Sunlight's what drives everything. It's low entropy energy.
Of course, it's something to aim for, no?
It's pretty cool. Yeah. It's in some ways it's very simple, but it's very, very beautiful and important.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Well, thanks very much, Liv. I mean, I think we both learned something today. I'll go study game theory.
What's the name of your society? I'll check it out.
The Aetherius Society.
How do I spell that?
AETHIUS. IUS. Aetherius means one who travels through the ethers.
Right. Cool. I'll have a read. Thank you for introducing me to it.
No problem. My pleasure.
Cool. So, what's the what's the process with your podcast? So you recorded this. Will this be uploaded somewhere?
Yep, it'll be on all major podcast channels, and I will release a song at the same time in Spotify, based on your game theory.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to, if you have inspiration to do it about something else based off what we talked about, don't feel pigeonholed at all to do it on game theory. Whatever inspires you.
Sure. No, it helps me to have if we narrow it down. Otherwise, it's too broad. So, and definitely, I want to be of service to you because you're doing these really educational videos and doing great work. So I'm trying to be of service to others. Serve the servers.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. Well, nice to meet you.
My pleasure.
All right, Jack.
Have a great day.
You too.
How on earth will we survive? Nature's worth more dead than alive. It's a race to cut down the trees before somebody else does. Where are our brains and imagination? Smoke starts pumping out damnation. There's no way to prevent this, 'cause we have perverse incentives to sacrifice values, be more competitive, racing to the bottom. How can we stop without cooperation? The tragedy of the commons, unnecessary sadness, multipolar madness, walking to the Moloch trap. How do we turn? How do we turn? Break the cycle, not fulfill. the prediction. Human extinction. Wars are good for the economy. Pollution boosts our GDP. It's nuclear weapons or risk destruction. AI's now an arms race. What's good for others is good because it's long-term good for all of us. We're rather glad and wise. Instead we have perverse incentives to sacrifice values, be more competitive, racing to the bottom. How can we stop without cooperation? The tragedy of the commons, unnecessary sadness, multipolar madness, walk into the Moloch trap. How do we turn? How do we turn? Break the cycle, not forfeit the prediction. Human extinction. Mourn for Moloch, Fury and Lemuria, and the conflicts of Atlantis. Do you reminisce? Free will versus freedom, within the law of karma, the madness of this moral drama. Are we gonna rise? Are we gonna stand? Or are we gonna fall? Are we gonna fail?
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review it on your podcast app. If you like the song, find it on all streaming services or at podsongs.com. Thanks to my musicians Maurizio San Nicola and Massimino Vodza, and my researcher Dori Verbo. And to you, the listener, thanks for tuning in.